The news from Lake Wobegon is brought to you by Fiber One Honey Clusters cereal. With a touch of sweet honey and brown sugar, each serving has more than half of the daily value of fiber. Fiber One. Cardboard no, delicious yes.
Well, it's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, my hometown, out there on the edge of the prairie. It got up into the 80s this last week, which is just too warm for normal people, but we managed to hang on somehow and sit there on the porch and put the water sprinkler out in front of the porch, just upwind of you. That's our air conditioning in Lake Wobegon. We never really have accepted air conditioning. It's a luxury that we associate with the infirm and with people who have lingering illnesses to comfort them in the shadow of their life. Normal, healthy people wouldn't go for such things. It's beautiful to sit out on the porch on a summer evening as the sun is going down and do what you did as a child. You sit and read a book. Loved reading books in the summer. As soon as I got out of school, it meant I could read as many of them as I liked. And I never had to write about them. I just read them in any order whatsoever. Fishing I never considered to be a good use of a person's time. And golf, to me, is a sport that always brings out the worst in people. And basketball is a game I ordinarily enjoy, but it's too dangerous when you play with people my age, men who have more testosterone than their bodies can support, and who lunge for rebounds and go play a physical game, and suddenly your Achilles tendon snaps, and you wind up in a cast for 6 months. I wouldn't even want to be in the cast of The Music Man for 6 months. No, you read a book. You sit on the porch and you read a book. Beautiful technology that has not changed very much. You just open it up and there it is. You don't have to wait for the pictures to download. At no time do you turn the page of your book and see a message that says your book has performed an illegal function. And someone is going to come and take it away from you? No. You just sit and read a book and you feel the cool of the water sprinkler and you hear the dog under the porch settling down into the dirt. And it's the same as it ever was back when I was your age, when I was young, just graduated from high school, wondering what would become of me. This delicious week after high school graduation, when the graduating seniors get 1 week of indolence to look around them at the town before guilt kicks in, or their parents kick them, and they get busy. Most of them are going to leave this little town, and so they look at it with a loving eye, safe in the knowledge that they will not stay around much longer, and missing their life here and missing the people whom they will not see again. Even as they are intent on escaping from them, they miss them, their families and their friends, and maybe the dumb nickname that they picked up here, that now at last they will escape forever and ever. I remember thinking, what in the world is going to happen to me? And I did not have high hopes. Because when I was 13, 14 years old, my father took his Kodak camera off the shelf and he took pictures of all of us. The prints came back a few days later, and I got to them first and I looked at mine. And I destroyed it immediately. But it stays in my memory, looking at this strange person in the picture, these strange spindly arms and this ugly plaid shirt, and this sort of reptilian face and this little beak. What a sourpuss. I looked at him and I thought, nobody's ever going to be your friend. Nobody's ever going to willingly put their arm around you. You're going to wind up an old man living all by yourself in an old rusted green mobile home at the end of a long dirt road with a sign out at the highway that says no trespassing, but you don't need that sign. Nobody's going to come in there anyway. You're going to have a couple of ugly dogs sitting outside your green mobile home, and you're going to sit in there in a mobile home that's full of old newspapers and empty beer cans, sitting in there eating beans cold right out of the jar. That's going to be your life. And then I thought, no, maybe radio. Maybe radio. I once fell in love with a girl who I rode back and forth to school with on the school bus. And after being in love with her for most of the 11th grade, I found the seat next to her empty when I got on one morning, and I sat next to her. I was so excited I could hardly breathe. I had to remind myself to breathe. We were almost to school before I got up my nerve to set my arm across the seat back behind her, not touching her, but with my arm there in a position where if she didn't object, I could have moved it forward so it just was slightly on her shoulders. But before I did, she looked at me and she said, "What?" I didn't know how to answer that question. I still don't. To me, it seemed like an omen of what was yet to come. I left Lake Wobegon and I traveled south. I hitchhiked. I went south. I went down to East St. Louis. I lost every dollar I had in a pool game, in a joint, playing with a cue that was crooked. That was where I met Howlin' Wolf, was down there in East St. Louis. I became kind of his chauffeur. I drove him back down to Mississippi. I was 17 years old. I developed a taste for the blues and for the blues life. And I walked into a little cafe down Tupelo, Mississippi, one steamy June morning, a year after I graduated. And there behind the counter was the most beautiful waitress I'd ever seen in my life. I was driving a 1957 Chevy convertible. It was black with pink wall tires and pink leather upholstery. I bought it with the money I had won playing poker all night in Memphis with a bunch of dairy farmers from Arkansas. I won $23,000 with a deck of cards in one night. And I walked into the Tupelo Cafe, and she walked over to me. I was wearing a black shirt with pearl buttons and black jeans, and I was wearing wraparound shades. My hair was short. I had a cigarette dangling on my lower lip. She said, "What can I do for you, mister?" I said, "I'd like a hamburger, rare, with a raw onion and mustard, a lot of mustard, and a raw egg yolk on top of it. And I'd like a shot of gin in a teacup." She looked at me. She said, "I never had anybody come in here and order that before." I said, "Well, you have now." I said, "You can call me Duke." Jenny, her name, Jenny, was spelled out just above her breast pocket of her uniform. She said, "Where are you heading, Duke?" After I'd eaten the rare hamburger with the raw egg yolk and the raw onion and thrown back the gin in the teacup, I said, "I got a car outside at the curb, Ginny, and it's pointed north." "North," she said. "Yeah," I said, "north." She said, "It gets cold up there, doesn't it?" I said, "That's what they invented hugging for." She said, "What do you do for a living, mister?" I said, "Ginny, I don't need to do anything for a living. I've got $23,000 in my pocket that I earned playing poker in Memphis, Tennessee. And when I get done spending that, I'll just get out my deck of cards and earn it right back again." She said, "You don't look like a poker player." She said, "You look like my cousin." Well, I didn't ask her what her cousin looked like. I knew that she could see through me, that even with those wraparound shades, even with that black shirt and the 57 Chevy, black with the pink wall tires, that I still was that kid in the photograph with that odd face, those skinny wrists, the spindly legs, the steel-rimmed glasses. And I decided right then and there that a person with my liabilities should not further cripple himself by telling the literal truth at all times, but ought to be able to give himself the latitude that he would need. I knew then that it's the worst thing you can do, folks, to look at a picture of yourself. You should never, never, ever do it, young people. It's just bad luck in the worst possible way. Ironic for me because my grandfather invented the camera. He invented the snapshot camera, I should say. He was building the railroad up in North Dakota, and he invented it to make copies of blueprints. That's what he thought it was good for. He never realized that it would have other commercial uses. He called it the Nodak, and when they were done with the railroad, he had no use for it, and he gave away actually the patent on this to George Eastman of Rochester, New York, who gave us 2 silver candlesticks in return, which we still have in our family. He renamed it the Kodak, and the rest is history. We've often thought of writing to the company about this, but somehow we just never got around to it, because our family hates cameras. For good reason. My grandmother fled anytime anybody came out with a camera. She'd run right in the house and close the door, and she meant it. She knew that it was bad luck, that the invention of the camera was what ended the age of faith and brought on the age of self-consciousness. I come from country people who did not think about themselves, who addressed themselves to a life that they lived because it was given them to live. They were people who lived with dust in their nostrils, who woke up with the sun every morning, and who washed their faces in cold water out of steel basins and sat down to breakfasts of johnny cake that was baked in blackened pans on wood stoves. And they drank their coffee black, and they were silent as they ate, and they did not look each other in the eye. But after breakfast, they went into the front room, which was for this purpose. They knelt on the floor and they prayed to God for forgiveness, for mercy, and for guidance. And they prayed as long as they felt it necessary. And they read from the Word of God, and they held it in their hearts, and then they went out and did their work without complaining, without cursing. They did what they needed to do. They ate dinner at noon, and they came in and ate supper in the evening, a quiet supper. And they went to bed early. They had no electricity. They pumped their water by hand from a cistern. And they had kerosene lamps, which were not to be wasted. So we lived in dim light. There were no yard lights. And when the kerosene lantern was blown out, it was very dark indeed. You went up to your bedroom and you lay in bed, and if your bladder was full or your bowel was full, you felt your way down to the end of the bed in pitch blackness, and you found the porcelain thunder jug, and you squatted over it, and you did what you needed to do, and you crawled back into bed, and you never felt cheated or deprived because of this. You were living the life that was given to you to live. And on Sunday, you went in the company of other sanctified brethren, and you sang mournful hymns to the risen Christ. And you sat all together, and you sang them without any musical accompaniment whatsoever, because that was what God said in His Word as you understood it. And you were there to follow God's Word explicitly, no matter what, and not to live by fashion or to please other people. If strangers came to our door, we did not invite them in, only so far as the kitchen. That was as far as they came in, because they were not sanctified brethren. They were of the world, and so their friendship did not matter to us. We were honor-bound to raise our own food. We did not buy canned or frozen food, and only ate canned or frozen food that had been canned or frozen by somebody whom we knew personally. It was our honorable duty not to pay extravagant prices for things that we could make ourselves. And so we did not pay for entertainment, and we did not pay to eat in restaurants. And we did not pay to travel for pleasure, because this was what books were for, after all. Well, my people all left the country. They left the farm and they moved to the city. And the opinion of strangers became more and more important to them. And they did not kneel on the floor to pray in the morning anymore. They said a brief prayer over the food, and then some of them even forgot that. And they learned to pay extravagant prices for things. But we did keep this one ban. Never, ever look at yourself in a photograph. If you forget everything else that I said, and remember only that, never, ever look at yourself in a picture. It's the worst kind of luck. Then I will have left you with something. That's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average.